Factsverse presents Man found at sea after 14 months reveals horrifying truth. Help us spread the word about Factsverse by clicking that like button, and also be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our future videos. Most people don't know how much they can really endure until they're put to the test. Most people will never find themselves tested, but those who do find that they can handle more than they thought. And that's what happened to Salvador Alvarenga. He was a 36-year-old fisherman from El Salvador, and he wished to make a living and set out with another fisherman named Ezequiel Cordoba. Originally, Salvador was planning to fish off the coast of Mexico with his friend Ray Perez. But a few days before the two were going to set sail, Ray backed out. Since Salvador wanted a companion on the trip, he asked Ezequiel, who was nicknamed Piñata. Well, the two had never worked together or even spoken, but they enjoyed fishing, so Salvador was sure everything would be fine. Before setting sail, the men made sure that they had everything they needed. They had 70 gallons of gasoline, 16 gallons of water, 50 pounds of sardines for bait. They also took buckets, harpoons, hooks, and knives. In case of emergency, they took a mobile phone that they kept in a plastic bag to keep it dry. They also had a GPS and a two-way radio. They had everything they needed. But when they first set out on the ocean, they navigated slowly. Salvador was able to maneuver in the choppy waves. At first it wasn't all that bad, and the two had gone out in similar conditions in the past. As time went on, though, the weather got worse and worse. Salvador tried to stay calm, but Piñata wasn't ready for this. Piñata became more nervous and moody as the weather got worse and worse. He signed to go along to make $50. He often worked 12-hour days, but the weather was making things hard for him. He held on to the rail for dear life. He was vomiting and crying. Soon he began screaming about their imminent demise. Even though Piñata was giving up, Salvador remained at the wheel trying to steer in the stormy sea. Finally, the storm subsided. They could finally see ahead of them, and they realized they had been drifting away from the land for about 2 hours. Even worse, the motor was no longer working. Salvador took out his radio to call his boss. He wanted him to know that the motor wasn't working, but he got no response. Next, he tried to use the GPS to see where they were. That wasn't working either. Finally, he tried to use the radio to call the Coast Guard. They told him to drop the anchor so that they could be found and rescued. The only problem with this is that there was no anchor, and the ship kept drifting out to sea. The storm may have been over, but the sea still wasn't calm. The two men used buckets to get rid of the water that was spilling up onto the deck. The waves were unpredictable, and these two fishermen didn't know what to do to keep the ship steady. It was freezing outside, the men were wet, they had to huddle close to each other just to stay warm. When the sun came up, there was still a good amount of water in the boat. Salvador was a seasoned captain. He knew that he had to align the boat with the waves, and that could help him navigate back to land. The two men started talking to assess their situation. The boat was 25 feet long and about the size of a pickup truck. There were no lights, no raised structures, which left them almost invisible at sea. Worst of all, they had to dump everything that they caught. The first day, they caught 1,100 pounds of fish, but that now was making the boat too heavy, so if they didn't dump the fish soon, the ship could capsize. So, one by one, they dumped the fish back into the sea. It was a mistake, though, that would haunt them for months. As the men drifted, they became very hungry and very thirsty. To get food, they took turns catching turtles, jellyfish, and seabirds. Finally, after 14 days, it started to rain, and they would have fresh water to drink. It had been 2 months that the pair was at sea, and Salvador did what he could to deal with the situation. He got used to catching and eating what they could find. Piñata wasn't doing as well, though. His mental health, physical health, and his spirit had all declined. When he got sick from eating a raw bird, he stopped eating altogether. His fear and depression were literally killing him. Salvador told Piñata that if he died on the sea, he would go to Mexico and tell his mother that he regretted not being able to say goodbye. Not long after that conversation, Piñata did pass away. Salvador lost it. He knew he was alone now at sea. For days, Salvador pretended Piñata was alive. He talked to him for several days, but finally he accepted the truth. He took his friend's clothes and then dropped his body overboard. Salvador knew that he had to try and make it, so he watched for ships, and he saw many but he couldn't get to them fast enough. During one nasty storm, Salvador's boat got caught up in a current, and soon he saw shorebirds above. In the distance, he spotted a green Pacific atoll. It was small, but he knew that there was dry land and maybe food and shelter. He was very weak when he got to the shore. He couldn't stand, so he crawled out of the boat naked. He was on the island of Tile Islet, and there were people on the island. He made it to a beach house. A couple, Emmy Lidbuck Meadow and her husband, Russell Lycadrick, rushed out to help him. He asked for a doctor and drew a picture of a boat before he passed out. He was on the water for a total of 438 days before he was saved. When Salvador finally did make it home, he reunited with his family. He reached out to Piñata's mother and told her what her son's last words were. He even wrote a book about his horrible experience. Looking to cash in on that book, Piñata's family sued Salvador for $1 million, even claiming that Salvador had eaten their son. Salvador says he knows what happened on the water and he gave his friend a proper burial at sea. Fortunately, most people did believe his story. Subscribe for more.